Test. 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 Test.
This meeting is in order, and I believe Michael had finished his presentation, and we were on the question for Michael. And you are asking some questions.
Right. Okay, Michael, to recap, I was exploring what the impact of the widening of Georgia 400 is going to possibly have on this proposed development, particularly the placement and the buffer around the Mansell Road exit ramp, and the width of 400 itself at that point, plus there's been several stretches of 400 that are already expanded where they built those noise barrier fences. And do we look forward to that also being in this location? Do we know yet?
I don't have any information on noise barriers. I can tell you that the property, I believe the right-of-way has already been, GDOT has already secured the right-of-way from this property.
Okay.
And this site plan does accommodate the expansion of Georgia 400.
Okay. So that would just leave an open question about any noise barrier fencing and whether that will impact any of the expectations of this property.
We'll certainly look into, see if
Okay.
we can get a little bit more information before City Council on the noise barriers. I don't have an answer to that question
Okay.
this evening.
Another question is, since Big Creek is running along the southern edge of this property, Big Creek being a catch-all for stormwater, do we know where the flood lines are for this and whether that will potentially impact these plans?
I don't have any information on, obviously they're not showing any home or townhomes in
Right.
floodplain.
Right.
I don't have any information on floodplain on the subject property. I'll see if I, during the break, I'll see if I have any information on the survey within the application. The applicant may be able to address that as well.
Okay, because we're all sensitized to the fact that Big Creek has been experiencing some extraordinary flooding in the last few years, and I think we can look forward to more.
I can tell you our stormwater engineer did review
Good.
this plan, and she certainly would have let me know if anything was
Okay,
proposed
Jill
within the
reviewed, okay.
floodplain. Yes.
Thank you. And last question, I am not familiar, when the street is deeded private, are they also then responsible for maintenance of storm drains, or is that still the purview of the city?
The storm drain is the purview of the city. Those easements will be in favor of the city.
Okay, so they'll have to be designed and maintained to city standard.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment regarding the noise walls. When I was on the board, we had a school that was down there during the design of the new 400, and those neighborhoods right there in Sandy Springs were really right on the cusp. And I think that from what I remember, and it's a little bit older information, but that stuff was all negotiated really in unison with the city of Sandy Springs and all those communities there, and they had asked for them for a long time. I very much doubt that there are noise walls here because it wasn't residential. That's, I mean, I don't know, and Michael will find out, but.
We certainly will look into that, definitely.
On condition 14 that talks about the Georgia 400 buffer, do we need to beef that up to that the issued screen from Georgia 400? I know there are 3 stories, a type of vegetation that you'd put there to screen the Georgia 400 from residences.
I'm sorry.
The height of the buffer. I know we are screening the billboard, which I don't know how high it is.
So they're actually, so the condition would be that they have to replant the existing 60-foot Georgia 400 tree buffer has to be replanted. But then there's also a condition that talks about a 25-foot buffer around the billboard, and the intent is to separate the residential community from this billboard. This billboard is lit up. It is angled away towards the north and southbound lanes of Georgia 400, so it is angled away from the units. But we did add a condition requiring that separation with the buffer. We do acknowledge at planting, the buffer will be typically 8 to 10 foot evergreen trees. There are a few variety, cryptomeria and arborvitae green giants that are faster growing evergreens, and we'll work with the applicant to probably use some of those species so that we get the buffer in faster.
Okay. What type of retention measures are you envisioning, or it says approved by staff on condition 8?
Condition 8?
So
we just put that condition in because we're in the North Point Eco District. We typically will put, our stormwater engineer will recommend that we do green stormwater design requirements, since we are in this eco district where we are trying to promote green sustainability. I can't speak to the exact measures or techniques that they would use. Bioretention are usually one of those. The applicant may be able to expand on that.
Okay. I did see you have approved by staff, so
Yes.
that's sufficient. Any other questions?
Got one.
Yes.
So, Michael, I just thought of this while we were talking about the billboard, but that buffer zone there, the 60-foot wide buffer zone, and where the billboard is located, that's obviously right inside the track of this new residential development, right?
Correct.
So, silly me, but since this is being converted to residential, why is the billboard remaining?
Because the billboard has rights to remain on the property. Again, the applicant is here and may be able to give a little bit of background on that, but the billboard has rights to this billboard. The billboard company has rights to that billboard on the property, and we asked the applicant about it, and they said that there was no intention for the billboard to be removed.
Okay, I will ask the applicant, because that sounds a little odd that the billboard company has rights to continue to have the billboard in the middle of a residential parcel. So I'll ask them. I'll ask them. Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, we'll excuse Michael and ask the applicant to come forward.
Chairman, Commissioners.
Microphone?
There we go.
All right, we can hear you.
Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Stephen Jones of the law firm of Taylor Duma. I'm here today on behalf of the applicant, David Weekly Homes. I'm accompanied today by Mr. Billy Stogner with David Weekly Homes, as well as Tyler Lasser. He's with the engineer of record, LGA. We've got a PowerPoint that we're pulling up on the screen. Staff did a great job giving you an overview of this application and these requests for these applications and the proposed project. I won't duplicate staff's presentation, but I do want to run through a few things if I can make this work. There we go. To give you an overview of the property, here's a slide giving you an aerial view of the property as it sits, like staff said, at the entrance, at the off-ramp for 400 as you're heading towards Mansell northbound on 400. It is at the end of Beaver Creek. If we come here, this is a more recent satellite imagery. As you're coming down Beaver Creek, there is some commercial that fronts on Mansell. You can see the property's proximity to North Point Parkway. You can also see that as you're coming down Beaver Creek, there's an existing multifamily development on the north side of Beaver Creek, as well as a utility facility. Zooming in, you'll see a larger view of the property. Again, it is substantially cleared. You can see on the right-hand side, and this is the concept plan, you can see that existing part for Big Creek, and you can see an overview of the development. Staff also showed you an example of the renderings, the type of product here. Later in the presentation, I'll go through, I've got some more detailed architectural drawings, but I wanted to show you this first to give you a color rendering kind of concept to frame that as we get into more detailed black and white color views of that. Coming back to the site plan, I want to highlight a couple things about the site plan itself. And as I do that, I'll walk through some of the questions that we heard from the commission to staff. The gated entry, staff did a great job pointing out kind of the reasons why a gate makes sense here, so I won't go back into those. But at the gate, we do have a divided median with landscaping in it to create a nice entryway, a visually appealing entryway for residents as they enter the development. Moving further interior to the site, we have a central amenity area with a pool, pocket park, and cabana. All of these townhomes, as staff noted, are rear loaded, meaning obviously the garage is to the rear and the front of the home faces the other side. So all of the fronts of the home face common areas. As you'll see here, these units shown on the screen face that common amenity area, the common pool, pocket park, and cabana. Out those front doors, there's meandering walkways which lead to those common areas, creating a sense of, community open space. So you're not exiting your home into the garage or into the car park. You are exiting into common areas, which we think is a great feature. You'll see that here again with those different units. Again, those sidewalks, as you exit the front of the home, you're either entering common area or you're exiting to a sidewalk that leads directly to the Big Creek Park. On the south side of the development, you'll see we have another active, passive amenity area, Inside of the bioretention stormwater facility, we've got a fire pit in another covered area. Commissioner Manley, I believe you were asking about the stormwater features here. This is a bioretention area. We're trying to incorporate some of the ecological requirements or eco-district requirements of the North Point overlay. Mr. Lasser can talk more detailed about this, but those bioretention areas, it's not your traditional stormwater pond, you know, the ugly thing you typically see. This is a larger space, and there's going to be water-loving plants planted in it. So like, you know, marsh grasses, various types of plants like that. And so it allows a stormwater feature not only to be more eco-friendly, but also to be more visually appealing. On that south side, outside of the retention area, we've got a dog park as well as an extension of the Big Creek Greenway, which you'll see further up here extends all the way to the edge of the property, and then you pick up the public portion of the trail from there. This is an excerpt of the actual concept plan. I think, Commissioner Manley, you were also asking about the floodplain. Do you see that dotted dashed line on the south side? Not, you can see it just to the north of the property line. It kind of meanders through what I believe is a sanitary sewer easement. See that? That's the floodplain. So we have all of our improvements outside of that. The bioretention stormwater facility area also has to be outside of that. So framing that again, if you see this larger concept plan here, not only is the bioretention area outside of it, but also the Big Creek Greenway extension is outside of that as well. I do want to talk about Commissioner Stratton. I believe you had a question about the billboard. We are, if you look here, you can see on the black and white concept plan, which is the more detailed engineered style concept plan, we're providing that 25-foot wide buffer around it. The applicant, David Weekley Homes, is not the owner. It's my understanding the owner has separate contractual relationships with the billboard company, and then likely that billboard company has other contractual relationships with its advertisers. So the owner did not make that part of our acquisition of the property. So we have no ability to do away with the billboard or alter its rights to exist on the property. We do, however, try to incorporate comments we've heard and thoughts that we've had about keeping that outside and screening it from the residents in the development. There were some questions too from multiple commissioners to staff about noise barriers on Georgia 400. I want to point out on this concept plan, you can see another dashed line sort of to the inside of that floodplain line on the west side of the property. If you can see that, that's original right-of-way line. So what we've done on the concept plan is contemplate and take into account the expansion and the widening of Georgia 400 so that the development would not be affected by it. And our buffer is measured from that. And that 60-foot buffer, which again is going to be from the right-of-way that will be used for the expansion of 400. As staff mentioned, there's a condition that requires the applicant and the developer to replant that. And we would work with staff to make sure that it's replanted with species that are going to provide adequate screening and will grow as quickly as possible to provide as much screening as possible. We are pushing GDOT for the installation of a noise barrier. It's obviously in their discretion whether they do it. They do what they want. But if they don't do it, we have every intention to request that they permit us to do it ourselves. Now, we can't do that if they won't allow us to do it, but that's our fallback position if they're not going to install it, is to say, hey, can we do it? Now, again, they have the right to say no, but we think if we're funding it, they might say yes too. But so we're going to work through that in the permitting process, of course. Just to give you, these are a little bit noisy, but these are more architectural style elevations of the buildings. As we go through this, I'm going to show you two pictures of each side just to show you that there is a mixture of materials, and the materials change so you don't have a homogeneous or repeating patterns of elevations throughout. So you can see here predominantly brick with a mixture of siding and shaker single. Here, same thing, but swapping out for board and batten instead of the shaker. And those are obviously the fronts. So this would be that you would exit into those common areas with the walkways that lead to the common amenity areas. In the rear, staff mentioned this, but we have an elevated deck above the garage. That elevated deck sits above the driveway. I do also want to reiterate that we've got these are two-car garages, so you could fit 2 cars in the garage, and then there's room for additional 2 cars in the driveway itself. And then we've also provided overflow parking. We're quite overparked just because I forget one of the, Commissioner Manley, I think it was you as well, that talked about overflow parking
Francis,
outside.
time is 10 minutes. I'm just letting you know that.
On Beaver Creek. I'm wrapping up, Helen. On Beaver Creek. So we're overparked inside as well to ensure that that doesn't happen. You figure 2 cars per dwelling, so you get 2 in the garage, you get 2 guests, and then we've got another 18 overflow. Again, this is another rear, again showing you transition and differentiation of materials. Side view, ample windows on the side view. You can also see the differentiation and mixture of materials on the side elevation. Same thing here, just the other side. And then finally, staff's conditions. I do want to go back and highlight that staff is recommending approval with 19 conditions. The applicant consents to all those conditions. We think that they're well thought out and well drafted to address any concerns staff may have. And so with that, I'd ask that you vote consistent with the staff's recommendation and recommend that the council approve this with staff's recommendation. Should you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. If I can't address them, the representative for the engineer of record or the applicant, David Weekly Homes, is here as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions for the applicant?
I've got one. Can you put the site plan back up?
Yes, sir.
So
Do you want the colored or the black?
the color one I think is better.
There you go.
Okay. So let me just paint a picture. What is the acreage again of this parcel?
It's approximately 10 acres.
Okay. So David Weekly Homes
That's correct.
bought land, 10 plus acres, and is asking, what,
We're the contract purchaser.
so is that a yes or a no? I'm not sure I know what that means.
We are under contract to acquire the
Right,
property.
okay, okay. So you're under contract to acquire this, but you didn't make an attempt to try to buy out the land where the billboard owner owns I mean, that can't even be it. That's a third of an acre.
The owner is not selling that.
Did you
Would not
attempt,
sell.
did you attempt either through friendly means or non-friendly means to?
Mr. Stoner with David Weekly Homes can give you more color to
Okay,
the contract negotiation.
thank you.
Billy Sucker, David Whitney Homes. We did initially try to purchase that parcel, but the owner wants to keep the rights to access that billboard. He has a lease with Lamar Advertising. He gets a mailbox check every month. It's a lease that's been put in place for a while now, as the city's aware. And the easement to the billboard has been executed years ago, and it's already in place. And he was not willing to sell that part.
Because here's my motivation, right? I'm trying to speak on behalf of the future residents here that don't have an opportunity to speak right now. And if
100%
if they did have an opportunity to speak, I guarantee you 100% of them would not want to have a billboard smack dab in the middle of their community, screened or not, where it fronts 400. I mean, it's not way down at the south bottom end. It's not way up at the top at the north end. But you're saying you guys have attempted to make it financially appealing to this billboard owner to give up this quarter acre of land.
Correct. is
And he won't do it because he gets a check in the mail every month.
correct. And he's under contract with Lamar Advertising. They have a land lease.
Right, and just from a common sense perspective, right, like, this was zoned office. If there was a 5-story office building there with a billboard, that's one thing, but wanting 67 townhomes in the townhome community, that's beautiful, I'm in support of it. But that-
I totally agree with your concept. 100%, we'd rather not have that there. There was nothing we could do to convince him to sell.
Okay,
That made financial sense.
okay, thank you.
Assuming that there's no sound barrier, what will separate the 400 space, Georgia 400 space from the buffer? Is that just like a wooden fence, or what would that be?
So we are looking at a wrought iron fence around the entire property. And then the sound barrier would be on the opposite side of that fence, between the fence and the billboard. So that would actually help with some coverage of that. And then we'd have all the landscaping between the fence and 400, between the sound barrier and 400.
So the sound barrier would be between the billboard and the residents?
Correct, but it would be blocked with landscaping.
Could you-
Yes, ma'am, but it would be blocked with abundance of landscaping.
There's
Using that buffer that
landscaping.
staff is-
It wouldn't be like the silver one.
I'm sorry?
It wouldn't be like silver like we see at the other end.
We
of
are trying to
400.
figure all that out. We've been trying to
Okay.
get with GDOT, and it's been hard to schedule time with them. But we are 100, we want this as pretty as possible. Obviously, there's some conditions to this site that, as you've noticed, aren't favorable for residential. But we believe, due to the location, city, surrounding area, what else we could put here, this is a very attractive site for a certain price point townhome.
Clarifying question, you mentioned putting the sound barrier fencing behind where I see reference to the 6-foot privacy fence?
So you would have the privacy fence on the development side of the buffer.
Yeah.
You'd then enter the buffer. We'd ideally replant that buffer. Then you'd have sound wall. Then you'd have more buffer.
Okay. Only reason I'm questioning is by precedent, when Georgia 400, GDOT puts the noise barrier fence in, it is right hard along Georgia 400, right next to the pavement. It would not be within your space.
That's why we're trying to work
Yeah,
with it.
we're
I
trying
see.
to discover all that with them right
Okay.
now.
We're
So-
going to ask them to move it inside to that buffer as they plan that.
Good luck. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all in the exploratory phase as of now, but we're trying everything we can do to get it to be more favorable.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at here is, I'm working on trying to find ways to include language in the conditions to address that, but it's pretty open and pretty vague right now. So it would basically be useless to try to specify where it should be or how or whether it should be.
Because it's all going to be subject to GDOT. And they really don't. They're not going to have a full, complete conversation with us until we're ready to build or in construction drawing phase and permitting phase.
Thank you.
I need to ask a clarifying question. Did I hear you say that you want to put the sound barrier or sound wall on the residential side of the billboard?
Yeah, ideally,
So you'll be screening out the billboard?
that's the
Well,
intent.
I mean, we were screening, but we couldn't, the easement would still have access to the billboard, and where there's privacy fencing, we would have a gate.
And then between the privacy fence and the sound wall, you have vegetation to screen the sound wall from the residents.
So ideally, we can screen it from both sides, the 400 side and the
Okay,
residential.
so you would ideally be putting it on your own property.
I'm sorry?
You would be putting the sound wall on your property, but not on Georgia 400
Ideally.
easement.
It's
So ideally,
It
correct.
would be better sound attenuation the closer it is to our property.
Now, the question is whether you would require approval by DOT if you're putting it on your side of the property. or the city?
We'll work with them how they want, and whatever is best. We just haven't been able to sit down with them and hash all the details.
I think this is probably a question for Michael, whether that would require city approval or DOT approval if it's on their property. Or do you know?
If the sound wall is proposed in GDOT's right-of-way, of course, they would need to approve that. If it's on the private property, the city would approve that.
That's where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So they don't need to talk to DOT if it's on their property.
If it's on their property, then
The
it
city
would
will
be
have to
city.
approve that.
Yes, correct.
What is your position on that? Would the city approve that?
I hadn't really considered that, but I don't see why not. If it benefits this community, I don't see why we wouldn't allow something like that.
Would that not constitute a requirement for an additional variance? Because right now you have limitations on the type and height of fencing allowed on private property.
Correct, yeah. So we do have, for a residential property, we do have a maximum size of a fence or wall, and that would be 6 feet.
Right.
So there would be a variance
Okay.
needed potentially for that. Again, I had not considered that. That had not come up in our discussion, that they were considering providing that on their own property. So we need to look at that.
If it's included as a condition for zoning, then it would be approved as part of that package, because it goes to council.
And that's where I was wrestling, because right now I would have a hard time coming up with wording for a condition that would be specific enough that would cover, exclude the need for a variance, but doesn't button them into a solution that they can't get. Like if they still can get it out of GDOT, then it's not required. If they have to build it themselves,
Correct me if I'm wrong, if we put it as a condition of zoning, it's not a variance, it's a requirement. And it's approved as part of the package
And that's
that
what we're
goes to
getting at.
council.
yeah.
We have seen things, conditions added to properties that would have normally required a variance. I have seen that in the past.
And then council can decide, what to do. I think the attorney wants to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, to add some color, the problem here is GDOT might do their own, but we don't know. If they do their own, then we can't do our own. So should the board or the commission want to impose a condition like that, I'd want to make it binary, right? So if GDOT doesn't, then we shall.
Except that GDOT will not be screening the billboard from the residents. They'll be screening.
Or they'd risk a lawsuit.
They'll put it on their own
So-
right of way unless you grant them easement to do that on your property. I think the biggest concern of the board, and I believe will be for city council, is that you have a billboard next to residential development.
Understood.
Yes, that's the key. How can we screen the development from the billboard? Because obviously it's staying.
Absolutely. And to that point, that buffer is going to be replanted with evergreen trees. So if we did the sound wall between the residents and the billboard, we'd still want to screen it between the residents and the sound wall with something that would grow up. So visually, we're going to screen it with vegetation. We just want to make sure that we're not creating a situation where it's impossible to comply with the condition. If GDOT does their sound barrier, then that's why I just asked if we could make it binary.
I think the board has enough to craft something when we go to discussion. Unless
I
you
think
have-
this will, 400's not moving lightning fast. So my guess is, once this is acquired, if this is approved, that this would come out first. So I don't think there's actually we can wait and see what GDOT does, because I think GDOT doesn't, as Michael pointed out, they don't have any say over what's done on your property.
Correct. But what we can do is, prior to permitting, we can figure that out and try to get an answer from them. And then if they will give us a definitive answer, then we know which pathway we have to take.
I think we have enough, and we can advance this during discussion.
Just one other related question. I'm noticing on the north end of the property another billboard easement.
That's the access easement to.
It's the same easement. They drive all the way around.
Okay, so the sign guy can't erect another 70-foot billboard on the north end of the property.
That easement's currently there, and it's only to access where the billboard is.
Okay, once again, just asking on behalf of future residents of Alpharetta.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? No further questions at
Thank you
this
so much,
time?
Chair, Commissioners.
You're welcome. I'm going to open this for public comments. And the board can ask questions anytime during discussions. There is one person behind you. Do you have any comments? Not at this point. All right. Well, the public comments is open and shut because there is no other person other than the applicant. Anything else you'd like to add before I turn this over to the board for discussions?
No, Chairman. Just ask that you vote consistent with the staff's recommendation, and should you impose a condition regarding the sound wall, I think that's fine as well. We just, as you're crafting it, if you have any questions, please let us know.
Okay, it will be nuanced enough. I don't want to put words in the board's mouths, but it will be nuanced enough. And council will always make the final decisions. They can make changes to what we recommend.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I
Thank you,
did have one more question for the applicant.
Sure.
On those homes that are going to be adjacent to, right next to the billboard, is there anything different in their contracts that, oh, by the way, you know, you're buying this house right next to that billboard? Or is that just,
100%.
is that in the homeowners association
Every sales-
bylaws and everybody gets the same thing? Or do the homeowners that are buying there, you know, sign off, oh yeah, you know, I see that thing, it's not moving?
It's all disclosed during the sales process and in the sales contract.
They can negotiate if they want.
Well, we disclose it all, so I mean, we have to.
Understood.
And then the HOA will obviously maintain all the area around it, and that will be in the HOA bylaws.
All right. It's on the board, and it's for discussion or motion.
I'm just going to say, I mean, I like everything about the application, and I'm generally supportive of it. I think everything you're doing and the conditions you've agreed to, I mean, and I look at the renderings, and I mean, that says Alpharetta to me. It fits, right? Having a billboard, though, a 60, 70-foot billboard within the property line doesn't say Alpharetta. And I won't pick on neighboring communities south of here, but I could mention a few that it says them, it doesn't say us. And, you know, somebody said to me once, you know, people like Alpharetta for a reason, because we have a really, really good unified development code. People like the way it looks, and you know, but it also takes people to uphold those standards. This is a little bit outside of that. I guess you attempted to buy that when you bought the other, or contracted to buy the rest of the land, but I don't know. I don't know. I got a lot of heartache about the billboard. And if I run into some of these future residents on the town green and I'm wearing my planning commission T-shirt, and they say, what were you thinking, Todd? You know, you knew there was a 60, 70-foot billboard right outside my community. I can see it from my son's bedroom. Does that say Alpharetta to you, Todd? How do I answer that question? Not asking you to answer that. It doesn't say Alpharetta. So
You have a planning commission shirt that I don't have?
I missed the planning commission shirt, I have to say.
No, you know, so I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to make a decision at the last minute whether that torpedoes it for me, but I don't know. I got a lot of heartache with that. Everything else I love. Yeah.
I mean, you make a great point. I mean, we're not trying to hide it from anybody either. It will be there. I mean, it's there. You're going to know when you buy that it's there. And if you don't, we will be making you aware of it. So they will be buying with the knowledge that the billboard's there. Which, because of the billboard also, we will have a little more favorable pricing, especially on that side. They won't be these extremely elevated high townhome pricing. But again, we will disclose it through the sales process. It'll be in the contract, it'll be in the HOA, and you'll visually see it. So when you buy, you know you're buying with the billboard on site.
Okay, we understand that. It speaks to the character of the city. And I've been in this planning commission long enough to remember when you have this discussion about how we want the Georgia 400 corridor to look like. It's supposed to be mostly office, up to 12-story buildings, no billboards, just to maintain the character of the city. And we've come a long way since. I did have a question for Michael Aria asking comparable areas with residential next to Georgia 400 this close. Because once you set a precedent, the next applicant will come and use this to advance their message to the board and to the city council that, oh, you approve that. So you can get to a point where you're promoting uncontrolled development, like some cities we know about, and then we lose the character of the city. That affects a lot of other things. So we try to maintain the integrity of our Unified Development Code. We are not picking on this because we like it. It's a very nice development. It advances the live, work, play, mixed-use concept of the North Point area. Nothing against it. It's a beautiful place. It's just that one aspect of it that is troubling most of us. I had the same concerns, Aria, and I'm struggling with it. So I'm looking for the wisdom of the board to guide us through how to craft language. Obviously, it's staying. Hopefully, it will not stay for too long and that it will be removed in the future. But for now, we cannot assume that it will ever go away.
Mr. Chairman, my comment is, editorially, I have no love of billboards either. However, I'm extremely mindful that there have been several landmark federal lawsuits regarding the rights of billboard companies to do business and exercise free speech. Whether we like it or not, they're in our lives. And I suppose I take the point that if anybody's buying in this development and they happen to be looking at a unit that is right there in front of the billboard, which will be impossible to ignore, that they're doing so because the price is made more attractive to them. That might have the opportunity to buy there that they might not have had they not had a somewhat less favorable property to look at. So you buy there, it's caveat emptor. You buy knowing that that's what you've got, and you pray that the cryptomeria or whatever you plant are tall enough to break your line of sight in a few short, pardon me, a few short years. We've got the unaddressed question of how to handle a noise barrier. I'm playing with wording like Georgia for condition 14. We can try it there. Georgia 400 buffer shall be replanted where sparse if it's determined that GDOT will not construct a sound barrier along the property as part of the expansion project. The developer will take measures to install one on their property between the billboard and screening landscaping. Are we comfortable with that possibility? As approved by staff, right?
Yes. That's about as good as.
Okay. So the billboard is in our lives until there's another landmark federal lawsuit where suddenly they don't exist anymore, or my fondest dream happens and the aliens come down and melt all the billboards. But until then, we have to deal with them. So I think this is the best way around that. If you can kill two birds with one stone with a noise barrier by also sticking it between the billboard and the homeowners, great. Otherwise, anybody buying right by it lives with it. I agree. It doesn't say good things about the community. It doesn't say good things about the community that we have billboards right up on the county border, glaring into people's backyards. We just lost that war. We move on.
So you don't want to make as a condition that the noise barrier go between the billboard and...
That's what I'm saying, is the latter part of that is between the billboard and the screening landscaping as approved by staff. if GDOT's not already putting one on their property as part of their widening project.
What about working with DOT for them to put it where we would like it?
They will not put
And if they
that on
don't?
private property. They will only put it in their right-of-way, if they're paying for it.
I think the way that you expressed it comes
Okay.
probably as close to successfully addressing what we want
And
to
you all are
address
comfortable
tonight.
with that? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Me?
You're probably best position.
Okay. I will make a motion to approve, which one is it? CLUP-25-03/Z-25-05/V-25-18, Wooten Tract Townhomes, with all conditions as specified by staff, with the exception of a rewording of condition 14 to read as follows. The Georgia 400 buffer shall be replanted where sparse if it is determined that GDOT will not construct a sound barrier along their property as part of their expansion project. The developer will take measures to install one on their property between the billboard and the screening landscaping as approved by staff.
And a second?
I will second.
Any further discussions? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries. All right, council will consider it on the 28th. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming. The next two items are from community development. First one is PH-25-07 UDC text amendments. Ms. Cook.
Thank you.
The next item before you is a staff research that we're bringing forward, recommending a change to the Unified Development Code regarding parking within the downtown. And we had heard different comments, I guess, over the last couple of years, as we've had a lot of development since 2015, as to whether if our parking requirements were enough for the downtown area. So after doing some research, and actually looked at the National Parking Association, it's recommended that parking designers generally design a maximum walking distance of 300 to 600 feet from public parking for retail. So we did a bubble graph, and I think this was included within your packet, and looked at what 300 feet would look like if you bubbled that out from around public parking within the downtown. We also looked at a 600-foot walk, and that's here in the darker red. And what we found when we looked at the public parking, we drew the 300-foot range, the 600-foot range, that commercial properties that are located to the north of Mayfield and also to the south of Old Milton Parkway would be farther than the distance, farther than somebody would typically walk. So we are recommending some changes to our code to require that parking requirements in the downtown overlay north of Mayfield as well as to the south of Old Milton, that they meet the citywide requirements versus the downtown code requirements. And I'll show you what that is with the chart. For instance, the downtown space requirement for a restaurant is 1 space per 500 square feet. So outside of the downtown overlay, citywide, it would be 1 space per 100 square feet. And then with the retail, 1 space per 500 square feet within the downtown, outside, 1 space per 200 square feet. So the recommendation is to just meet the citywide requirements.
Which increases the number of parking.
It does. It increases the number of parking spaces. if your property is north of Mayfield or south of Old Milton.
Can you point to Mayfield again? I did look at that. It wasn't as clear on the application.
And
Where
that
is
could
Mayfield?
change, I mean, that could change too in the future. If there was additional public parking, then the map could change to where parking requirements could be reduced if there was additional public parking that was added.
Where is Mayfield again?
Here.
Properties,
So this is the commercial properties that are north of Mayfield.
yeah.
I think it starts with Midas. Yeah, there's a Greek restaurant, Main Street Walk.
So there's a bunch of that retail that's there already. Some of the two-story things, we just looked
Correct.
at something last month. And I don't know where they create parking. Like if the requirement is increased, where does the parking come from?
Well, so if it's an existing property like Main Street Walk, they were already built to the old code. They're going to be grandfathered. This is for new development. So the change tonight would not require anybody that's already permitted or built to change their parking requirements.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the only development that's south of Old Milton would have been the Maxwell that had the reduced parking. So if the Maxwell came back in today, they would have a greater parking, but they're built, so there's no additional requirements.
Thing about that, though, does, increasing the parking requirement, does that increase the amount of asphalt and the amount of grading and that type of thing too? It's like, wait a minute, aren't we trying to sort of minimize that in the city where you have so much impervious concrete and asphalt?
It's
Yeah.
called,
Yeah, that's a good question, but this would match what we have citywide. So if you're asking about specifically in the downtown, I don't know if you're talking about citywide parking or just within the downtown, it does increase.
Citywide.
Okay. It does increase asphalt, but it is something that we're always looking at to make sure that we have the right parking requirements so it doesn't impact others. I think it was it last month that we had, maybe they didn't go to the Planning Commission, Dogwood that came in, okay, and was putting in a gate because of overflow parking. So a lot of our requirements we're looking at, is it impacting adjacent properties? Because we want to make sure we don't have overflow even into residential neighborhoods if it's a commercial project. So what we're finding is if it's farther away than 600 feet from public parking, then additional spaces are required. We would absolutely prefer trees or green space, but we do have to make sure that we don't impact others.
In the example of that restaurant that was going to be on North Main, Mamita's, I believe that was the name of it, they were going to use the space next to them, as parking. Would that be allowed under this change, that kind of thing? They didn't have enough parking
Right.
at that house to make it when they made it into a restaurant, whether that happened or not. So they were going to use the house next door. They had an agreement. Would the agreement still be allowed to be used to meet this requirement?
Yeah, so anything approved by council it overrules what's in the UDC. So you can get variances to what's in the code. So any kind of parking agreement, which we encourage in the downtown, will be something that was presented as part of a request for conditional use or rezoning. And it is something that staff does encourage. We have a proposal that's coming forward where they want to share parking. It's a wedding venue that wants to share parking with an office development that's not there on the weekends. So if you could have adjacent neighbors share parking, that is absolutely something we would still encourage.
I think this is great because what it will do is if you can't find enough parking based on the parking requirements, it sort of gives a nudge to what we want developed. It's a little bit of a nudge. It says, if this is if this is how much parking we need, and somebody comes forward and they said, but I want to do this, and they need like a whole giant parking lot, then maybe we will reconsider everything in terms of, and I think it sort of drives what we want, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anti-green.
We also want a good experience for citizens and visitors here. I mean, there's a town not too far from here that I'm not going to mention, but you know, you try to go to dinner there, and despite some efforts of some really good parking companies down there, it's hard. You know, your night is impacted right out of the get-go, and because it's hard to park down there. So I think you know, if somebody wants to have a dentist office, you need this much parking. If they know it up front, we're actually trying to do them a favor. They might not know, you know, I need so many spaces per so many square feet, and we're trying to be prescriptive based on our expertise and industry data, and I think that's smart.
And prior to 2014, the downtown area, it was restricted to this small area of really Milton Avenue, Academy, and Main Street. So it was a very small area. So when you grow it by the, you know, the acreage that we have, you do need to look at parts that are located to the north of that boundary different than when you're in the center.
As part of this process, this is somehow the same, but as part of the process, have parking meters been discussed for the downtown area? Parking, paid parking?
I don't know if it's, we continue to look at parking solutions for the downtown, and the main focus is trying to get rollover quickly at the on-street parking spaces. So we do have under contract a parking consultant that's looking at the best way to move forward with that, and it may be an app versus, you know, meter. I know you said meter, but you probably, it could just be some type of an app that's used.
But it would still be paid parking.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, the convenient on-street parking spaces, because they're just looking for the quick turnover.
The reason I asked about what the effect would be, just to clarify it, is that one of the most restrictive items in any development of any city is parking. I'll give you an example. I'll not mention the city either. I had a lunch meeting with two people, and two of us were able to find parking after 30 minutes. The other one could not after 1 hour. She had to drive back home, get in Uber, and then come back. Wasted 2 hours before we could start lunch because of lack of parking. And yeah, if we're going to encourage, you know, good quality of life in our downtown area and surrounding communities, you have to have enough parking. So the effectiveness of this is increasing the number of parking spaces that are required, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The increase or marginal or de minimis increase in impervious cover is so insignificant. We usually look at what is called effective imperviousness, not whether it's paved or not. The ground is so compacted that it almost is impervious. It doesn't percolate. So the difference between asphalt and concrete and compacted grass is almost nothing when you look at effective imperviousness. So,
and we will absolutely still encourage, you know, the creative sharing of parking, which is something within the downtown that has to come to council for approval. But we do not want to have, you know, streets that are lined with parking lots.
and trees.
It should be buildings and trees and.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
We also have, within this request for the change to the UDC, is changes to the elementary and middle school parking. We had some concern from council as to whether we had enough parking for the school, so we did a little bit of research. We also, by aerial photos, and counted existing schools, the number of parking spaces they had at Manning Oaks Elementary, and we found that they had 2.12 parking spaces per classroom. Hopewell Middle School had 1.94 parking spaces per classroom. And our current code only requires 1 space per classroom and administrative office plus 5 visitor spaces. So we are recommending, based on our research and looking at the existing schools that we have and counting those spaces, that change from a minimum of 1 to 2 per classroom in administrative office, and then just remove the +5 visitor spaces.
Kathy, quick question on that one.
Yes.
So this would come into play if we were to be building a new elementary and middle school, or is that also going to impact existing? And will they eventually?
It doesn't impact existing. And then, of
Okay.
course, if it's a public school, they're exempt from our requirements.
Okay.
So this is private schools,
Okay,
and it would have to be a new private school.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So the actual amendments, which are in the package on page 3 of 9 and page 1 of 5, well, this changes page numbers. The text itself. Are you going to read those, Kathy?
Yeah, and this is, you want me to read each one of these? Is that what you-
For the benefit of those who are watching or listening.
So we're recommending approval of text amendments to UDC Section 2.5, Parking and Loading, and Appendix A, Alpharetta Downtown Code Section 2.4, Parking and Loading, as well as Section 2.4.1 to schools, elementary and middle schools, from minimum 1 space to 2 per classroom, and administrative office with removal of +5 visitor spaces.
Any questions or further questions? We have somebody in the audience who'd like to say something about this before we discuss it? She's looking around. Obviously not. So it's on the board to, for motion. Any further discussion on it?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve PH-25-07 Unified Development Code text amendments parking as noted by staff.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? Those in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries. The next one is PH-25-03 UDC text amendment, zoning district and permitted use districts and regulations.
This next item, it's a lot of cleanup. There's no changes, it's cleanup, and a lot of the cleanup I'm going to show you was directed from our city attorney that we needed to move forward with some changes. And the changes are to clarify what is required if you have a master plan and you need a conditional use. The changes will clarify and make it to where it's very clear that if it's in a master plan, it's a master plan amendment with a conditional use, not just a conditional use. We already require that if somebody's within a Windward master plan retail and they come in and they want to add in a use that they have to go through the conditional use. It's already required as a master plan amendment plus a conditional use. But the way our code was written, people were confused with that it's only a conditional use. So it's just a language cleanup. And the other language that we cleaned up was to match our future land use plan. We'd actually noticed this several years ago, but didn't make the change until we had additional changes that needed to come forward. But we had with the R4A listed as low density, and if you look at the description within our future land use plan, it's actually medium. So these were just errors. We had R4D as low density, it should be medium, and the R8A should have been high density versus median. And then the R10M dwelling, we actually removed the attached and 4,500 square foot detached. And then the CUP community unit plan, we're just putting instead of a concept master plan. And you'll see that throughout the document that we wanted everything to be the same. Wherever it says concept, that's changed to master plan because that's the language that we use. We use that through the zoning process. It's also on our applications. So there's
think-
no real code changes. These are just,
This is what's being done
Making it
in
easier.
practice. This is what's being done in practice. Ordinarily, we're making no significant changes other than language.
correct.
As I was reading this, and just a moment ago, I thought in the future, AI is going to help identify conflicts and defects and voids in code when.
And then we may have
top
one meeting here instead of, every 2 months with a UDC change as we find
You
something.
can identify it right away, and you'll be able to go straight to where it is through AI.
I do appreciate the clarification, because as you probably are really aware, with the short-term rental issue, I was poring over UDC as referred to CUP and master plans, and was getting a headache trying to keep the terms
Yes.
straight. So I really appreciate this.
Yeah, and so.
They missed it
Commissioner
and-
Reeves said there's no substantial changes. It's just, this is how we practice. And we want to make sure that each zoning district matches the language within another zoning district. Where we reference master plan within a MU zoning district, we should also reference it the same in CUP.
Yeah, they missed it, and they do this for a living. So we are off the hook. As I was reading, I was like, why didn't I see this before? But at the same time, it's corrected now, once it's adopted by council.
And so all of that language is just to clean up, and then I'll show you this, because it's a little different within the chart. Doesn't change any of the uses, it's just puts in the language, puts in the language that an M means that a use that is permitted in accordance with an approved master plan that is required for rezoning to the district. So it puts in that requirement for the M, so it's easier for people to see that it's not just a conditional use, it's a master plan amendment. Already practiced that way, it's just making it clear.
Okay.
But glad to answer any questions you may have.
I think that chart's going to be very helpful for applicants.
I
think
don't
it
have
is.
any.
Easier to
I
read.
read through all of it, and I think it's very good corrections and cleanup. That's to use your words. And any questions? Any comments from the back? I have to ask. We have. All right. Thank you. Back to the board for motion and our discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve PH-25-03 UDC text amendments zoning districts.
And permitted uses.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Or in favor, please raise your right hand. Motion carries. Anything that else the board wants to discuss at this time?
And we all have to stick around for a picture for Jeremy.
Just to say, it's been a brief but genuine pleasure serving with you, Jeremy. Thank you for your service.
Hearing none, meeting is